Thanks, Rio. Just glad to be here and appreciate the invitation from NAEMSE to present on this topic. There's certainly a lot of topics out there that are simulation related, and this is something that I've been definitely focused on in terms of exploring a lot of these bigger picture sort type of items through my work with the Society for Simulation in Healthcare, and of course, as a longtime EMS provider, EMS educator, involved in the industry. So nice to be able to be here today. I don't have any disclosures of note, any financial disclosures, anything like that I am aware. You can see that I'm a full-time employee with the Society for Simulation in Healthcare. When we're talking about curriculum and how to embed simulation throughout the curriculum, that frankly, you're going to sketch just a little bit of the tip of the iceberg today. There are so many different theories about curriculum design. Of course, the simulation methodologies themselves are quite varied as well. So we're going to try and cover a lot of the overarching concepts, overarching principles today, and give you a good start if you're completely new to this and embedding simulation into your curriculum. If you are a little more experienced, I hope to have a lot of nice pointers for you as well, and some process pieces, things like that, that will help you with your process going and improving your curriculum over time as well. Regardless, we have to start with understanding as a shared mental model what simulation is or is not as I'm presenting it. And I pull a couple of definitions from the Healthcare Simulation Dictionary just to give you some insight into that. And ultimately, it is one of the tools in your arsenal that you can use for your EMS curriculum, whichever piece that is. It's generally considered to be an educational technique. It may or may not have technology itself involved, but ultimately, it's trying to replicate something that happens out in the real world in some way that brings that live event, that live occurrence, patient care situation to your learners. And again, there's lots of different layers in that regarding scope of activity, depth of activity, so many of those educational design principles that are embedded in that. But this is where we start our conversation today, is that it is focused on the notion that simulation is one of your tools, your educational tools that you are using throughout your curriculum along with all the other tools. And so it's that means it doesn't act as a one-size-fits-all kind of tool, anything like that, but it is a great tool to have in your arsenal, especially as you gain more understanding and experience with it. I personally see simulation as a tremendous means to bridge the gap between the book and the street. And this is something that has been a long-term challenge in healthcare education, especially, and certainly in paramedic, EMT, and EMS education as a whole, because it's a real difficult transition for a lot of people to take what's in the head, that cognitive domain, and apply that in that real world setting, especially when we have all kinds of psychomotor and affective issues that are also having to be dealt with well beyond the cognitive domain issues, which of course are critical to have that nice foundation before you can do things like start an IV, assess a patient, anything like that. But simulation really gives us an opportunity to help guide the learner from point A to point B. It sort of bridges that big gap and helps them understand what it looks like to take all of what you've been talking about in class through your various sessions and now say, right, this is what we're going to do. And of course, the learner could be at any kind of stage. It could be absolutely beginner. You can have very experienced learners, and we're still trying to bridge to a new future, a new opportunity for practice and behavior. And simulation can be really important in helping create that nice bridge between the two. So we can take what we have up in our heads and put it into action through our hands, our voice, and so forth. And just a really nice way to look at it from my perspective. And of course, speaks to the value of simulation as well. I will point out, I know I mentioned a little bit, it's not always about the technology or all about the plastic or any of these things like this. And it's certainly not a one size fits all. In theory, you could take an entire paramedic curriculum and make it entirely simulation based. It would be probably very inefficient, very costly. The learners might like it a lot because they love simulation in general, but that's not always the best route for you to take when you're putting together your curriculum. And that's part of what we'll discuss today, is where it might be a better fit than other educational tools in your arsenal. And of course, I have to point out the simulation is not easy. It's not something where you can just take the mannequin. I've heard people talk about, well, we'll just take the mannequin, throw it down on the floor, and we'll replicate last night's call. It was really cool. Well, it might be interesting, but the educational value of that type of approach is frankly a little limited, or very limited perhaps, and not necessarily educationally sound either, because there's very little planning behind it, very little practice in putting that together. And so we want to avoid those sorts of things, which also, just like most educational efforts, takes a lot of planning, a lot of practice. And of course, we get better over time with experience as well. Talking about the curriculum side of things, we certainly have a lot of opportunities in EMS. I've given some samples here of the types of curriculums you may already be involved in, and there's certainly many, many more. A lot of the certificate programs that you see in continuing education, and wide varieties there. I've used the Lattuca and Stark model, which talks about it being an academic plan, and some of you on the call might get a little concerned about the notion of that academic piece in there. I just want to ensure that we're not talking about you have to be at a university or anything like that to apply this type of model. It's just a learning plan, but it does have quite a number of elements, and it can be, as you see on this, a little shorter in length from these certificate programs all the way up to a full degree program. All of these things are curriculums and do require a lot of design, a lot of thought, a lot of practice to put together, but they all have the end goal of ultimately teaching the learners what is desired. And there's lots and lots of things that could be part of that desired outcome. And of course, when you're looking at something like a degree program, it's probably pages and pages of desired outcomes to become a paramedic, to become a nurse, a physician, any of those sorts of things like that. Clearly, loads and loads of things that have to be put in there. And we're trying to tie them all together through some kind of organized plan, which is generally referred to as the curriculum. And we have to keep that long-term goal in mind, a timely application of all the pieces therein to achieve those goals, and get to the end process there. But that's kind of where we start our framing today. This is a model that I used when I was putting together my dissertation, and I think it was a very interesting one to think about how the academic curriculum as a whole, the academic plan, is framed in the larger ecosystem. We typically have looked at sort of that tight little middle part of it with the educational design components. What do we have for instructional resources, tying it to our learner level, creating lesson plans, all those pieces like that are sort of in that middle, that educational environment type of thing. You can see the feedback loop, they're calling it adjustment in this model. That's oftentimes what we often think about as part of our curriculum design. But I want to encourage you to think about the fact that it's actually occurring in a larger ecosystem. This is, and you can see that this is set in a social cultural context. And there's lots of things at your institution, both when you're working with other departments, when you're working with the larger university, larger hospital setting, whatever it might be that you've got to work with, be it the budgeting process, be it sharing of resources. Sometimes there's the, we're frankly competing with other departments sometimes. You can see up in the upper left all the external forces that are in play, the influences. We certainly have a number of those in EMS that are important to our curriculum design process. You have the National Registry, you have COE that all giving you requirements, things that need to be achieved. You've got your state requirements, you've got suggestions and opportunities put up through NAEMSE, for example. You have the National Association of EMS Physicians that weigh in from time to time, the air medical curriculums, all these things, those external influences, certainly there's quite a few of them. Over on the right side, you can see that we're definitely having to frame things in the overall educational process with the desired educational outcomes. That's the broader world of education, so we don't want to be doing things in a way that's different from all our well-grounded educational literature and research. And of course, the overall feedback loops that we get from the public, from our hospitals, from our ambulance services that talk about, are we doing well? When the NAEMSE publishes those results and for your program, be it for EMS as a whole, all of that is influencing our curriculum design and telling us where we have to improve, where we have to adjust. Frankly, it can also be a little bit more discreet, saying this is where we really need to have more simulation activities. A notable piece of that would be like the OBGYN high acuity, low frequency type events. And we have real troubles getting those actually in terms of our clinical experiences and getting those hands-on or even in the real life type situations. And so how do we make sure our paramedics, EMTs, 911 systems are all prepped to handle those very challenging sorts of situations? And that's all part of your curriculum ecosystem and the influences that go into your design process. I would point out that there's certainly many more theories that are out there, many more concepts related to curriculum, but I wanted to share this one just to give you, again, that sort of basic sort of overview of the different types of things to take into account when you are adjusting, building, growing your individual curriculum for whichever program that you're in charge of. A little more discrete in terms of the levels of things that we're going to talk about today are some of the items that you see here when we're talking about where can simulation fit in that overall curriculum. And I recognize that a lot of my conversations will probably be about the paramedic curriculum. The principles underneath each will certainly apply to your continuing education, your EMS education, any of your certificate programs, perhaps for community paramedicine, for 911 training, any of these sorts of things like that. But when we talk about simulation, we certainly have to understand where our learners are, which is a pretty common concept that we're looking. We think about this learner-focused, educational methodologies. Definitely have to have that front and center. But I would encourage you when thinking about the simulation piece of it, you've got to know where your instructors fit as well. You probably have that sense already. Some make great presenters for PowerPoint type things, some not so much. You'll find the exact same things with simulation because it takes different skill sets, different abilities to be able to really run simulation well. And if you see individuals that are struggling to pull them away from that bedside presentation with the mannequin because they're too involved, they probably need a little bit more training to be able to get to where they can really deliver simulation effectively. So understanding your instructor skill sets, their capabilities, that's a really important piece of the puzzle when we're thinking about where we can implement simulation. Of course, we can just look simply at the number of instructors, which are part of your resources, because we don't always have the amount of instructors, the amount of lab personnel that we might want to be able to actually implement everything we want. So we have to keep that in the back of our brain as we're going through and designing the curriculum and implementing simulation. We also want to make sure that we are also well embedded in high quality concepts of simulation activity design as well as we're putting this in. And I hope you have a lot of great templates out there that you're already using for all of your simulation activities. If not, find one that you like, implement it, and there's lots of different ones out there, and so you're going to have to find something that fits. Lots of different resources out there that can help point you towards that and the concepts that you're looking for. It can be the objective development, it can be what the actual scenario is and how to put that together. It can be the debriefing process, and that includes not only the learner debrief, but your faculty and staff debrief, your operations specialist inclusion in that in terms of how the technology may or may not be working, all those pieces like that. So we want to have certainly a nice consistent set of simulation activity design elements and components as we're going through designing our curriculum, embedding more and more simulation therein. Think about it as a continuum, of course, and we're going to want to think of moving to more advanced learning and learning concepts later in the process, simpler to more complex type of activities, embedding them throughout the various sections that you see below, because lab sessions, often they're called labs, but that typically has a high component of simulation activities embedded in them. Maybe it was just learning how to do a medication administration on an orange or something like that. That still actually is a valid simulation activity, and often in those lab sessions that are part of your overall curriculum. And all these pieces, even hospital clinicals, field clinicals, even up to the field internship, should have some consideration for where does simulation get embedded in those pieces to support that learning. Because even though the student has gone on, the learner is now out in the field, actually practicing medicine under the auspices of your clinical settings, with a preceptor, all these things that are needed to be there, do you have them come back in to make sure that they're continuing to ground to the core principles that are part of the curriculums overall, part of good practice in EMS and healthcare, and even up to that field internship? Because where are they feeding back to you that they're having some gaps in the patients that they are seeing? I think you all can probably relate to students that have come and said, I just can't buy a cardiac arrest. I can't buy a trauma. I can't get a, whatever it might be. They're getting loads of the other things that are all part of what they have to get checked off on. But where's your support and your simulation activities that can help them get some of the other things that are gaps in their process as they go through that clinical and internship phase, to make sure that they are well-rounded, ready to take the National Registry tests, and to actually, of course, more importantly, be an amazing healthcare provider as an EMT, a paramedic, whatever role they're preparing for, and to do those things that are well grounded in patient safety principles, high quality patient care, achieving the desired outcomes. And so we have lots of places to embed those simulation activities. I do want to make sure we ground our conversation today as well in the notion of all these other tools. And I don't have all the tools that are available to you. I just wanted to put a list out that gives you an idea of where simulation is part of that arsenal. I know there's not a lot of interest perhaps in doing those presentations, lecture type format, but even those have a place. They have a part of the components to help give us some foundational pieces that can be embedded into the other work. And so keep that in mind, that simulation has its place that is very complementary to all these other pieces that are in there on this slide. But again, requires a deliberate process. Quick overview on some of the considerations specific to simulation. And ultimately, I decided to go with a modality-focused type approach, because when you were thinking about early versus later learners, simpler versus more complex tasks, attaching them to your lectures, your small group work, your flipped classroom work, your clinical setting activities or checkpoints, understanding the various ways in which simulation can be delivered is pretty critical to that. Because if you start thinking that you have to use a high fidelity mannequin, I know that I throw that term out deliberately. It's not my favorite term, because the notion of high fidelity itself is a little bit of a challenge, because you don't actually need a fully programmable mannequin with all the bells and whistles to create that high fidelity, that high realism type setting. But it's a common term that helps us sort of frame our conversation for today. Task trainers, things that you see out here on the screen, are very commonly used in EMS, of course, and really help us with a lot of the things that are needed to embed those core skills that we use all the time, over and over and over again, are part of the larger care. It could be a patient assessments, it could be these hard skills like airway management or doing procedures, IVs, any of these sorts of things like that. They do tend to be isolated from the whole in terms of the patient when you see the setups that you have here on the screen, for example. But they are really valuable in getting skills to where that muscle memory is built in, and the learner can move on to more advanced principles and have the basic ones really embedded in their practice. And they don't have to worry so much about remembering, oh, what were the steps of the IV? Did I remember A, B, C before D, E, and F? All those sorts of things like that. So skills, those task trainers are just absolutely amazing for all that sort of stuff. Standardized and simulated patients, you'll see that term used in different ways. Also things like embedded participants. A lot of it depends on their role, but one can argue that standardized patients are actually some of our most highly realistic, high fidelity type pieces of our simulation arsenal itself, because of the fact that it's the closest to a real patient. We know when we talk, we're looking at a mannequin or an IV task trainer, that the skin just isn't the same. No, we're not starting IVs on our standardized patients, just so we're clear on that. And that's one of the limitations of SBs, because we rarely can do those invasive types of skills. But they are tremendously valuable in helping us with the assessment side of things, the communication, a lot of those affective domain issues that are so critical for our world in EMS healthcare, because we've got to engage with the patients, the family, other healthcare providers in really odd situations, and standardized patients can really help our learners bridge that gap again to that level of practice. Of course, mannequins, and this is a very broad range one because you can actually have some very low fidelity, again, low realism type mannequins. Some would argue that you could use even a CPR Annie for some of the things that we use for mannequins. That's probably a little bit of a stretch because that's more of a task trainer type thing. But many of you probably have the ALS mannequins that only have one arm for IVs, and you can see that there's sort of this range all the way up to the ones that have the anesthesia gases, which we don't typically use in EMS, but might if we're doing some critical care training, looking at our air medical or ground critical care transport, where you actually have to manage those things with a very complex team. So there's a wide range of things here, and of course, mannequins are great for more of that team-based approach, supporting communication for the team, planning, overall patient management. Again, there are some gaps related to realism, such as we have only certain places we can listen for airway sounds. You only have one airway unless you have multiple mannequins from different manufacturers that have some different appearances. But they are an incredibly valuable tool in your arsenal. Do require a lot of resource management. They are not cheap to obtain nor to maintain, but again, really, really valuable for you. Flat screen, mobile type app activities. These are really nice actually because they're very accessible to students, especially the mobile app type based activities. They can bridge time between in-person class sessions. It can be accessible from a distance. Lots of repetition available, and they often are very programmable for you to allow for different types of activities, constraints, guardrails for what it is you're trying to achieve. But they're really nice activity that can often be embedded through those things. We're seeing more technology through things like the VR headsets, where you're working in a fully virtual environment. Oftentimes we have gaps here, especially related to the haptic components of that, although we're starting to see the haptic gloves and give you that feedback. Those are very expensive and don't give you the full feedback like you're touching a patient. Is more like the buzzing and other types of haptic sort of feedback, but it can give you some really valuable pieces of your learning. Many of you probably don't have that equipment yet. And of course, there are some specific things related to this type of technology, as well as the AR headsets, where you're having the overlay of the virtual pieces over the real world, putting anatomy over a mannequin or a standardized patient or something like that. But these mixed reality, virtual reality type of components are very challenging, but extremely valuable in their own ways. And again, very accessible in terms of distance learning, in many cases, if the equipment is available. Virtual environments are also linked to this. You see a couple of samples here that we're seeing more and more of with the driving simulators, the virtual rooms, virtual settings, where you can put out a more realistic environment. That really helps with things like the affective components, because you get more of that feedback from the external environment in which we work in EMS that often is not present when we're just in a classroom or lab setting, because that's a bit artificial and is only a very small part of where we actually do our patient care, of course. We know that for EMS, the world is our patient care environment. You could be in a lecture hall, and that could be a patient care environment, but it's pretty infrequent for that. So trying to find things where we create more of that situational awareness, understanding of the environment, the environmental issues that you have to address. Some of these virtual environments can be really great for setting those sorts of things up. Serious gaming components can be applied to a lot of the previous modalities that you already have in there. It has to be a serious games feel and setup for it, though. Otherwise, it just feels a bit silly to the learners, especially those learners that are more serious, and they don't always understand why to do the serious game component of it, even when it's well developed. But it is an incredibly valuable piece of it. A lot of learners really like the competitive notion of it, either self-competition to improve their score, which should tie to improve patient care outcomes because they're doing better, capturing all the steps of processes, making sure they're not missing things, even with IV starts, maintaining a clean/sterile environment. I know it's very difficult, of course, to maintain sterile in the EMS setting, but of course, aseptic environments are certainly achievable in many respects for us. And a lot of those sorts of concepts can be grounded, repeated, and improved on through serious gaming methodologies. And so that's something that you're going to see a lot more of over time, oftentimes attached to technologies, but there's no reason that you can't actually do it for other types of technologies that have nothing to do with technology in itself. I want to make sure we also understand that there's some very low-level type simulations that are very cost-effective, very simple to do. May seem a bit silly. I do understand that, because if you're pulling out the Mattel cars to help people understand how to position vehicles on an accident scene, or how to do flow of vehicles for a disaster setting, you can see even Legos in that lower picture. Some people often think that's a bit silly, but there are extremely valuable components of it that are easily accessible from the funding side of things and teach very, very valuable concepts as well. So don't forget our tabletop simulations, our simpler activities, depending on what needs to be achieved in whatever stage of the curriculum that you're in. I also want to point out, to wrap this section up, the notion of hybrid simulators, which is where you're basically taking a couple of different types of simulators. SPs and task trainers are often put together, for instance, so you can actually start IVs while actually talking to a real patient, but they have an overlay over their arm that can take the needle and the fluid and perhaps some medication administration, whatever it might be. Broader scale simulations, especially when we're talking about perhaps multiple patients in a car crash or a disaster scenario. You can have mannequins and standardized patients, even task trainers set up, perhaps even some computer-aided components, whatever it might be, and that you have multiple modalities, but they remain separate within the larger context of your simulation activities. So you'll see those terminology pieces as well. And again, this sort of wraps up our look at simulation through those modality pieces, because that helps, again, frame what we're trying to do with embedding simulation in our curriculum. So for our process, our step one, when we sit back, is to think about a little bit of that larger ecosystem, that Lattuca and Stark model that I talked about, and actually assess where you are. What do you have already that's going, and therefore what do you know about simulation? So you have your existing curriculum, you've got task trainer activities built in, mannequin, whatever it might be, type of simulation activities. That should also describe what resources you have, what you have in your department, what you have in other departments that may be available, fiscal resources, time resources, faculty resources, that all inform how much bandwidth you have in your program for expanding those activities or improving them. You've got to even have an understanding of your organizational culture. Will they allow this sort of change? Will they really want to accept that you add those additional activities? And this is that risk of, well, our curriculum has been going on for years, perhaps decades, and it's been fine. We're getting great paramedics. We're fine. Why are we changing? That's a culture thing, actually. And so you've got to be able to sell why you're trying to embed more simulation activities or change what's previously existed. So understanding where you are with that piece of it, and who your supporters are, from your president to your CEO to your dean, whoever it is in your organization, that will help you actually evolve the curriculum, improve it. And of course, you have external supporters that are distant and may not be readily present through the National Registry, NAEMSE, NAEMSE, and so forth, who are talking about, let's make sure we're continually improving our curriculum. Take what's good, keep it, tweak the stuff that's not quite so good, because the paramedic of today is not the paramedic of tomorrow. When I went through my paramedic program over 30 years ago, we were at the Life Pack 5 level, and we had, we didn't have 12 leads. We didn't have so many of the medications that you see now. So care has to continue to evolve. Technology certainly has evolved, and why shouldn't your curriculum be evolving as part of that? But you've got to have these understandings of all the various components of your system, of your own situation, your learner desires, before you can go and start tweaking that curriculum, because it's not always acceptable in many organizations to tweak the curriculum. And of course, we've got to remember that it's actually a fair bit of work as well. And so I don't want you to think, oh, this will be easy, no problem. So we want to take a good time, work through this assessment of where you are, where your faculty are, where your learners are, what your organization looks like, and that reflects back to the ecosystem as well. And that's ultimately what you're trying to discover, is what is my ecosystem, the current status, and ultimately where is it that we want to go. And so this is actually quite a big step. and takes a little bit of time to get through, but it's very important, just like any needs assessment, to do it well and be very thorough with it. Once we have that basic groundwork of, all right, here's my situation, here's what we need to do, you can start to go to more of the discrete level questions, things like you see on the screen here. Where are your gaps that don't exist in your curriculum, where simulation and simulation activity might help really close that gap down? The learners, we're certainly seeing our learners want more and more technology-oriented, hands-on application type activities. And so it's taking that overall notion and saying, right, let's have a bit more of a discussion about that. And where is it that we're going to focus? Because if you give them everything they want, you're going to risk running into the everything is about simulation. And that's not necessarily the best approach to it. So you want to really focus on where you get the most return of the work for developing those simulation activities that most benefits the learners and also meets them where they are, with a desire for more of that hands-on, more of that learning how to apply things in the real world. And that's all just part of how, again, education has evolved. We can certainly look back, 30, 40 years ago, and the medical school curriculums, for example, were very heavily oriented towards the lecture-based format only, and got to learn it all when you actually went out and were a resident or an intern. We're certainly much more beyond that now because of things like technology and newer modalities of learning. And so we want to make sure we're continuing to engage our learners with those evolving desires, evolving needs that they have. You probably are going to have some problems or issues that you want to eliminate. Sometimes these are a little difficult to know because we don't always get the feedback that helps us identify those. But if you do a good hard look, you're going to see where you have some of those struggle points in your curriculum as it exists currently, where you might be a good opportunity to say, look, let's take this one and this be a good one to really help bring up our learners, because we're seeing continuously that that's an area on the National Registry exam that they're struggling with. We get the feedback from our ambulance systems that are hiring our graduates that they're just struggling with this. And so we can take that feedback and really work to say, right, that's a great opportunity to fix what's going on there. Of course, we want to, even though things might be working well, there might be improvement opportunities that really expand the learning, especially as healthcare evolves and we're seeing new care, new opportunities, new ways to assess the patient, to integrate different tests and things like that. What is there that's going on in the ambulance systems in your area where they're starting to add new equipment? Are they actually putting in things like field testing for H&H or other chems that we're looking at? And so frankly, we got to understand how we can take those results and implement them into our process for assessing, evaluating, and making decisions for the patient. It's a great improvement opportunity and frankly, a great collaboration with your local ambulance services when you see those things. Of course, we want to be able to enhance our existing pieces of the curriculum, because what's wrong with having, again, more of the hands-on approach? That's a lot of our learners, a lot of our faculty prefer those sorts of things. And frankly, just having, so much lecture and sort of, I call it grunt work in education, can be a little bit boring. And so it's nice to be able to embed more activities throughout the curriculum, helps keep the learners engaged. And ultimately, it goes back again to the outcomes, because we don't want to just throw simulation activities in because it's fun, because it's flashy, because our learners are happy about it. That's the learner engagement and are they satisfied with your program? That's important, but it's not the only outcome. We've got to make sure we're improving patient safety, some of those big long-term ones, that we're maximizing the use of our resources that we have in terms of fiscally, functionally, whatever it may be. So there's lots of outcomes for us to think as we're walking through, and we're identifying where we can actually think about embedding more simulation in the curriculum, whatever it might be. Once we're there and we have a list, we're going to go back to our core resources that we have. Simulation activity design templates, other simulation expertise, consistent pieces that we're using that match up to all the other pieces in our curriculum and tie it nicely together. And we want to make sure we're incorporating what has been done previously where it's possible, We may be completely replacing the previous activity. We may be enhancing it, whatever it might be, but there should have been desired outcomes and the learning objectives associated with it, other things, checklists, whatever it might be. Embedding that in our simulation activity design, because we don't want to lose the core of what was there already as we shift into more simulation activities. We want to keep that foundation, build on it, have a really robust simulation activity that it again improves from what we had previously. Perhaps it was just learner focused engagement with small group work, and we're turning it into a simulation activity, like whatever it might be. There was things that you had fundamental that were part of that previous activity, part of that previous existence of that piece of the curriculum, and we're building it. Let's keep all the good stuff and move into all the other pieces. And of course, involving the learners and staff and faculty throughout the process are important as well. They're going to be able to give you good feedback on what's working, what's not working, how to tweak it, how to make it better. Frankly, what's more interesting to them. One of the things that we have to make sure we engage in, for instance, is how many learners are involved in each of the activities. If you look at the real EMS world, well, we have a staff of 2 on an ambulance typically. Well, that's a paramedic and EMT, but this is my paramedic course, so I can't really have 2 paramedics. So how do I get an EMT in to play the role of the embedded participant? And then you're just running one of your individual students through, your paramedic students through. That's not necessarily efficient. So how do you involve the learners to tell them, look, we're going to have to do some role playing at times, that you're going to have to be a little more stand back, think more like that EMT, while the primary individual who's participating in that activity is really the focus? Or is it an earlier one where we can just go a tag team type principle? And involving the learners, staff, and faculty helps us walk through those sorts of things as we're designing the activities to match up to our desired outcomes, the learning level, the complexity, all these pieces that are part of the simulation activity and curriculum design components as a whole. Implementation of simulation takes a lot of effort as well. And so we want to make sure we continue that involvement of staff and faculty in actually putting it into action. We actually want to pilot the new activity as much as possible before we roll it out to the learners as part of the official curriculum. Piloting it means we're just testing it, running it through real time, getting the feedback on where there might be some gaps, additional resources needed, whatever it might be. And finally, we're going to integrate it into the lesson plans. Where does it fit for that day, for that particular hour, whatever that slice of time phase, whatever it is for your existing lesson plan, and updating it to the new simulation activity that supports the growth of that curriculum. And of course, evaluation is our final step. It's critical because we've got to make sure that what we intended is what actually occurred. Did it go well? What was happy? What was not so happy? Did we achieve the outcomes that we actually wanted to achieve? We haven't lost anything from what existed previously. Are we continuing to grow, get more learning, better outcomes as a whole for that continuous curriculum? And ultimately asking what to keep, what to change, so that way the next time we do it, it's going to be better. And hopefully we get to the stage where it's just, hey, keep all the good things. There's nothing to change because it's established. And we can go back and now add the next new activity into your simulation arsenal for your curriculum. And that iterative process, keep going through one piece at a time. You don't have to do all of it all at once. You certainly want to have that larger picture of lots of things embedded throughout the overall curriculum, but just one at a time, not overwhelming your resources, not overwhelming your faculty, staff, operations specialists with all the things you're throwing at them with all these new simulation activities, but doing it in a very deliberate, very sort of long-term approach to improving your curriculum and embedding those simulation activities as you go. A few things to avoid. I know I've mentioned a little bit of some of these, but things like we've always done it this way. That's the continuous trap we always have. Curriculum has to evolve. Doesn't all have to change overnight. Doesn't all have to be dramatic changes either. But you've got to understand where your culture is going to allow for change and even changing that mindset. And we've all done a pretty good job of working to change that over time. But I still run into individuals saying, well, why do we have to do it? Because, everything that I've been doing so far works just fine. Well, that's great. The Model T worked just fine too. but is everyone still want to be driving a Model T? Because we could all be doing that. The car is still going to point A to point B, but it's not the best way to do it anymore, because as technology has changed, as what we have learned has obviously evolved as well. One of the traps that I see in healthcare, it's not specific to EMS, but oftentimes when we see things that don't say EMS, perhaps it's a nursing tool, a physician's tool, a tool that comes to us from respiratory therapy related to simulation, we think, oh, that doesn't work for us. It doesn't say EMS. That's a trap. It may not be fully applicable. I understand that, because they have their own environments in which they have to develop their curriculums and their simulation activities. But simulation ultimately is the same for all of us. The environments in which our patient care occurs, in which our simulation activities take place, those are the variables that are specific to our setting. It really doesn't help us to take something from an anesthesiologist and try and say, well, that's going to be a great learning opportunity for our paramedics by replicating an environment in an OR that just has a huge gap for us. But are there core principles about the patient care, the way the patient presents, the objectives of treatment and assessment, whatever it might be, that could be applied, and we just take that patient and now put them in a trauma type situation, a cardiac situation, whatever it might be. So lots of great tools out there that exist that don't say EMS on it, that don't fall into the trap of not using them at all because it doesn't say EMS. One of the other traps that I see a lot of people talk about is, well, it's got to come from an expert, sort of linked to what we see with the EMS trap. If it's not an EMS expert, someone who proclaims themselves as such, and therefore that's who I'm going to listen to. Every single thing that I'm sharing today, everything you see from other people, should be able to be cross-referenced to other individuals. Are you hearing the same messages about curriculum from other people who talk about how to integrate simulation into curriculum, design your curriculums, whatever it might be? Yes, there will be theoretical differences, there will be approach differences, preferences, whatever it might be, but they should all be linked to things like standards. They should be linked to consistent quality outcomes, all these sorts of things. So make sure when you're seeing someone proclaiming, well, I'm an expert in simulation, you should listen to what I say. Well, that's great, but I can trust you to a point, but I've got to verify. And I want to encourage you to think about using those different resources. And of course, the other thing that this is a big thing in what I have seen, and certainly what I have done in terms of presentations, is avoid the training scars. Too many times in simulation, we ultimately see things like simulating simulation. And that creates some real challenges because it ultimately embeds bad habits. It can be as simple as our CPR training, where we short circuit the 2-minute cycle. Okay, you verbalized that you gave a medication, you verbalized that you did a shock. Well, we're not going to wait the full 2 minutes. It's only been 37 seconds, but okay, 2 minutes are up. If you keep doing that over and over again, I mean, it's a very raw example, and I understand that. But the problem is it creates such a gap from the real world that you've actually created a training scar, because that puts the learner in a situation where when they're actually out in the real world waiting for the 2 minutes, they aren't realizing the amount of time that allows for real processing of all the data that's coming in that cardiac arrest type situation, how to work with the team, use those good communication habits that the AHA talks about. And it's important to have those 2-minute cycles to actually embed those really good habits. And if we keep skipping over it, you're actually creating a training scar. And there's lots of other things we see with training scars as well. Sometimes as simple as not using gloves. And how many people do you still see that have to take off the fingertip on their glove to feel the IV? That's a training scar ultimately, because they were taught the wrong way. They were taught that they had to do that. They replicated some previous type of thing. And again, I'm using very tangible examples, and training scars is an extremely complex concept where we have errors of commission and errors of omission and things like that. But make sure that your simulation activities don't replicate things, don't have the same repetition of things all the way through it. So we suddenly create those training scars, which often are very difficult to pick up on until now we have a patient that had a poor outcome, unfortunately. I mentioned on some of the tips to cross-reference your knowledge, because there's a lot of it out there with your simulation community, and you want to see those consistent types of things. If you see something that looks a little bit more like a zebra, It may have a particular time when that zebra has to exist for that particular setting, that particular simulation activity, but we want to make sure we have our herd of horses. We're focusing on the core concepts of simulation that we want to have embedded throughout our processes, and our community is so valuable for putting that all together. Remember that this is a process, not a single time activity. And I know that probably gets very frustrating because we want to feel like, oh, I got something done and I can move on. Unfortunately, everything needs love in our educational curriculums on an ongoing basis. We have to continue to take care of things, improve them. And it's an ongoing work, but it's a very, very important work, because the better we design our educational curriculum, all the pieces therein, the better our learners are that come out on the other end, and ultimately the better patient care we give. And so that's why that's probably the biggest outcome that I want to encourage you to focus on. We're doing amazing things through our educational programs that support that high quality outcome of patient care. And it's all embedded in those high quality processes. And it's a lot of work, but I want to encourage you to think about keeping on that good fight, because it really is worth it. And you really get some great caregivers out of that process. Long list of resources here, which frankly is just the tip of the iceberg as well. I know a lot of these come from the Society for Simulation Healthcare where I work, but you have some great stuff through NAEMSE and the Trading Post and the educational resources, the symposium. You're going to see a lot of really neat things about simulation that are coming to you from a lot of these the different experts that are out there. And I'm using the term expert loosely. It's not one of my favorite terms, because it's really, I mean, an expert designation just means that you're further along the path. Everyone's still learning. All those people that are further along the path, you can gain so much information from them when you're going to the symposium, when you're going to those Trading Post resources and seeing what might fit for your program. COEMSP and NRAMT, the simulation guidelines and recommendations. There's some of those people further along the path that have helped to put that document together and help you with what you're developing, so you have those core quality principles. SSH, we have our accreditation, our certification. So you're looking at organizational behaviors related to simulation, as well as individual behaviors related to simulation that are embedded in those high quality processes. And we have loads of accredited programs and certified individuals that you can go to as that resource. Our EMS affinity group, where we have lots of people there just sharing resources and discussing. And I know those things exist in NAEMSE. You're seeing different organizations here with like NACSL and ASPE as well that have those kinds of community as well as their standards that I have linked here. The dictionary and the code of ethics are huge resources for you that I hope you engage in and actually make as part of your overall simulation concepts and processes as well. And certainly you can reach out to me or to anyone at NAEMSE for more information, because there's just so many things out there that to learn, and even the learning process for ourselves is just that long-term how we keep getting better and better. So I hope this is very helpful, and it looks like Rio has put up the CEU's piece there, so that's great. So I'll stop there and ask for questions. And I think Rio, they have to put them in the chat, is that correct?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I don't know if anybody's, I'm not seeing anything come up in the chat. Oh, there we go. And it was probably a lot to absorb. So if you have to think about it and come up with questions later, then you can certainly submit those later to Rio and the others at NAEMSE, and we'll make sure we get your answers as well, of course. Type in my email address as well here. How can I tailor a return to work practice to create a plan for comfort? Great question, Brian. And I think my initial response to that is that's going to be a very individualized type of approach, since return to work often is dependent on the individual's particular situation, because they were taken out of the work setting for likely a particular reason, a physical injury, whatever it might be. And so you're going to have to work with their physician, with their therapists, be it occupational, physical therapy, to sort of say, all right, what do we need to do to reintegrate them into it, and how are we going to create that plan for comfort? Because especially when you're talking about physical injuries in our very physically demanding environment, how do we make sure that they're going to come back and not be concerned about getting injured again? And so creating that plan where they're going to be comfortable is going to be highly oriented towards working with the caregivers, working with the individual and identifying what their discomfort, their pain points are. So we're addressing those and just creating that very tailored plan. And typically for those, they're probably already licensed as well, but it's going to be a pretty fun work actually when you think about it, because of the number of people that you can get in to engage in what that curriculum looks like, that mini curriculum for that individual. And of course, having the medical checkpoints and working through what it's going to be to put them in a situation where they're going to have success for work. That's my initial response right there. A much more detailed response might take a little more of a phone call with you, and we can certainly address some of the things. Has anyone vetted the Laerdal monitor? I personally, I mean, I've used a lot of the equipment. I'm not sure which Laerdal monitor you're asking about. I would suggest going out to the community. Again, we have a number of member-based communities with SSH, as does NAEMSE, and you can ask them about what they feel they like, dislike, etc., with the various monitors. And all products have great points and some things that are a little bit of a challenge. And so the question might be about, you know, where it's strongest and where people have to do workarounds to get what's required. Great. Just looking through some of the other comments. Do we believe there are times scenarios should be stopped to discuss decisions as they are being made, depending on the scenario or training that is being done at the time? Great question there. Ultimately, I would suggest that your earlier simulation activities are more open, or it's more appropriate to have those stop points. Otherwise, our later ones where we have a more experienced learners should be allowed to go through and work through all those things again as the desired goals and outcomes, and of course the objectives allow for it. And there's a lot of guardrails that we have to have there. But most of those decisions, things about discussion for decisions and how they're being made, take place in the debriefing, unless you're using the simulation activity for a learning process. And that's where you can have those embedded stop points. Okay, we're calling a timeout here. At this point, you should be thinking about whatever it might be. And so it's a sort of a mini debriefing, a timeout that's actually deliberately embedded through the simulation activity and is part of the design process. So you have different points, those different options that different checkpoints, activities. Once they've started the IV, once they've given medications, once they've decided what the differentials are, whatever it may be, and that's where you can embed it. It's like, okay, it may take 2 minutes for some teams, it may take 2.5 or 3 or 4 minutes for others, whatever. All those things are there, but they're going to be checkpoints in that simulation activity. And you say, right, we're going to have a timeout, we're going to discuss that thing, and then we're going to restart, continue with the scenario. And that's just part of the simulation activity design. So I hope that was clear in terms of the answer there. So, we always build in a hot wash after running multiple scenarios in order to not single out learners and have all learners learn from other mistakes and good practices. Yeah, that's basically a lot of the overall debriefing concept. And hot washes versus cold washes, when those take place, and how they need to be learner focused, all those sorts of things are part of that simulation activity design. I like personally having what's called a semi-structured debrief, where I have questions addressed ahead of time before we even go into the simulation activity, so I know they're going to be addressed as part of the debrief. And then you can add in the as observed questions. That's the unstructured piece of it that can come up in the debrief later. Although I would also suggest the learners, if you let them start talking about it, are going to bring up all those things almost all the time, and you can just sit back and listen and help guide to those types of things that you were observing, even your pre-formatted questions. So the debriefing is a really great time to let the learners really run with that discussion does need some guidance from us as facilitators. Grant funds out there to improve programs with more simulations. Yes, of course, the ability to get those is often challenging. You may have to get creative in where you find those grant funds. Often it's through the government and specific to a purpose such as disaster training or something like that. I know when we were getting the simulation lab set up at the University of Missouri many years ago, we actually were able to get a lot of mannequins and things like that under disaster training funding. We knew that the mannequins wouldn't be doing a lot of things for the other 340 days a year, whenever we weren't using them for disaster training. And so we were able to take those grant funds and maximize the outcomes of the use of those resources. So it's finding those things, finding where you can get the grant, the knowledge of what is out there about the grants. So okay. After the bookwork is completed or as you go. I'm looking at Ted's notion here. I'm not quite sure what you're asking there, Ted. My suspicion is, are you asking, does all the documentation for the simulation activity need to be done ahead of time? And I would say yes, because you want to have a well-designed simulation activity that's embedded in all of essentially the lesson plan for that simulation activity. The timing of things, what the resources are that you need, how to set it up, any scripting, all those things like that. You really do need to have all those done ahead of time. Otherwise, you're risking ultimately just playing with simulators with just like, oh, hey, let's just run something. It doesn't have enough structure around it, but I'm not sure if that's what you're asking. I was thinking about when we discussed the time delays in ACLS and skipping the actual time. The risk with the discussing during the 2-minute wait period is that you create a notion that the 2-minute wait period is just a discussion. It, again, early on might be extremely valuable to just say, all right, we just did the defibrillation, so your next one is going to be about focusing on the medication, all these things that we have to have because of a timing sequence of whatever it may be. So early on, especially, great time to discuss those things. And then all of a sudden you can be like, oh, 2 minutes is up. Are you all ready to go on to the next thing? And just working through those very guided steps. So again, I hope I'm helping you with your inquiries there, Mike, about the various ways in which simulation can be constructed. Because you are talking about simulation as an educational tool, and it's very valuable for that as well. And Rio, I just realized we're at the top of the hour, so we probably need to finish up. Is that correct?
Yeah, as long as
you, Robert.
as long as there's no more questions, that's fine with me. So, all right, everybody. Thank you so much, Andrew, for being here today. We really appreciated you presenting this webinar for us. And everybody, absolutely. Of course, thank you all for attending. I put the link in the chat to obtain your CEU, but I will make sure I put that in tomorrow's follow-up email. And I will also include Andrew's email in tomorrow's follow-up email so that way you can contact him as well. So with that, we will end. Thanks, everyone. All right. Yeah, go ahead if there's anything else. I'm sorry.
No, I just want to say thanks to everyone and hope you have a great day.
Yeah, thank you too, Andrew. And we will see everybody next time. Bye.
Bye.